My brother, Nathan, slapped my 6-year-old daughter across the face just because she was singing. "Garbage, just like her mother," he hissed. My father just nodded. "She needs to learn a little shame." They had no idea. The family documentary microphone just became my weapon of revenge. My name is Julia Davidson. I'm 30 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the family's designated disappointment. That's why I found myself sitting on the polished deck of my parents' sprawling lake house in Lake Norman, trying to be invisible. The humidity clung to you there, a heavy, invisible blanket, woven with the scent of pine and money. I was a ghost at my own family gathering. The ice in my Lipton tea had long since melted, the glass sweating on to the perfect teak table. Across from me, my father, Arthur, swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Woodford Reserve always. The clinking of the ice a steady, indifferent rhythm. He turned a page of the Wall Street Journal, his world contained and orderly. My mother, Margaret, smelling of expensive La Mer sunscreen, adjusted her Talbot's cardigan, her eyes scanning the property with the critical gaze of a general. I felt like an exhibit. Julia, the Raleigh daughter, the one who worked at a nonprofit art museum. I'd smoothed down my summer dress, a floral print from Ross Dress for Less, and felt the familiar, hot flush of inadequacy. The only spot of pure, untainted color in this sterile landscape was my daughter, Isabel. In her bright yellow dress from Target, she was a splash of sunlight. At 6 years old, her world was still one of simple joys. Right now, that joy was the soundtrack to Frozen. She stood at the edge of the deck, her small arms outstretched to the vast, shimmering lake, as she belted out the chorus of Let It Go. Her voice, clear and pure, sliced through the heavy afternoon air. For a moment, I allowed myself to smile. She was everything I was supposed to have been before their expectations chipped away at me. She was free. That freedom, I should have known, couldn't last here. My brother, Nathan, slid the glass door open with a sharp, impatient sound. He was on his phone, of course, dressed in a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "No, the valuation is non-negotiable. Leverage the IP portfolio," he barked into his AirPods before ending the call. He shot me a look of pure disdain. "Can't you control your kid?" he snapped, his voice low and tight. "She's polluting the air." I opened my mouth to defend her, but the words caught in my throat. Isabel, oblivious, hit the song's final, triumphant high note. That's when it happened. Nathan moved with a speed that was terrifying. No warning. He crossed the deck in 3 long strides. He slapped her. The sound was not loud, but it was horrifyingly distinct. A sharp, dry crack that seemed to silence everything. The birds, the distant hum of a boat, my own heartbeat. Isabel stumbled sideways, her small body collapsing onto the hard wooden planks. Her song died in a choked gasp. She didn't scream. She just sat there, her hand flying to her cheek, her wide, disbelieving eyes fixed on her uncle, as silent tears began to carve paths down her face. Nathan leaned down, not to her, but to me. He got so close I could smell the faint scent of his cologne. He hissed, the words meant only for me, a private execution. "Garbage, just like her mother." The words were a poisoned dart, striking deeper than any physical blow. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict on my entire existence. I scrambled forward, my limbs moving through water. I scooped Isabel into my arms, her small body trembling. But before I could unleash the fury building in my chest, my father's voice cut through the silence. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Nathan, violence is not the answer," he said, his tone as detached as if he were commenting on the stock market. "But Isabel," he continued, finally lowering the paper, "you do need to learn a little shame. Not everyone wants to hear you screeching." Shame. For singing. Then came my mother's contribution. Her voice, sweet as southern tea and twice as venomous, dripped with satisfaction. "Oh, Julia, darling, you see? This is why you never get ahead. You simply don't know how to teach a child the most basic things." I was frozen, drowning in an icy sea of their complicity. And then I saw it. My uncle, Michael, stood by the far railing, a video camera in his hands. He was filming for his Davidson Legacy documentary. His face was a mask of shock. And on the small microphone clipped to his shirt, a tiny, beautiful, brilliant red light was still blinking. Recording. They thought they had extinguished a song. They had no idea they had just conducted the opening chord of a symphony of ruin. The steady hum of the tires on I-77 was the only sound in the car. In the rearview mirror, I could see Isabel, finally asleep in her car seat, her face blotchy and swollen, her small chest rising and falling in exhausted little puffs. We were heading south, away from Lake Norman, away from them. The slap wasn't the beginning, it was just the final ugly exhibit in a museum of slights and dismissals I had been curating my entire life. My mind, unbidden, began to wander down its silent, dusty halls, stopping at the first display case. The memory was lit in the warm, dim glow of a Ruth's Chris steakhouse in Atlanta. I was 17. The air smelled of seared butter and old money. We were there to celebrate Nathan's early acceptance into the Wharton School of Business. He sat there basking in the glow of my father's approval, a prince in his element. The heavy silverware felt alien in my hands. Timidly, I had announced my own dream. I wanted to study art history at UNC Chapel Hill. My father, Arthur, didn't even look at me. He was focused on his filet mignon, cutting it with surgical precision. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "And what are you going to do with that, Julia? Give tours in a museum to old ladies for $40,000 a year?" He finally looked up, his eyes holding no warmth, only a cold financial calculus. "Listen to me. This family doesn't invest in frivolous hobbies. That's a nice thought, but it's not a career. Be realistic. Invest." That was the word he used, as if his children were stocks in his portfolio. Nathan was his blue chip, a guaranteed return. I was a penny stock, a flight of fancy, too high risk and offering no discernible dividend. In that moment, surrounded by dark wood and white tablecloths, my vibrant, colorful dream was appraised, found wanting, and liquidated. It was the first time I understood that in my family a thing wasn't valuable unless you could put a dollar sign in front of it. That memory was the cornerstone of the collection. The next exhibit was housed in a shabbier location. My first apartment in Raleigh after David left me. It was a cramped one-bedroom that always smelled faintly of the previous tenant's curry. Isabel was 3, and I was broke, heartbroken, and terrified. My mother called, her voice dripping with the syrupy, cloying concern she reserved for my failures. "I warned you, darling," she'd said, the sound of her stirring tea audible over the line. "David is an ambitious man. He needed a partner who could keep up, who could host the right kind of dinner parties. The fault, really, is that you were never quite interesting enough to hold a man like that." There was no comfort, only blame. A week later, desperate, I had called my father for help with the rent. I had hated myself for it, but I had a child to feed. He agreed, of course. His help came in the form of a PDF attachment to an email. It was a formal loan agreement, complete with an interest rate and a repayment schedule. He needed me to sign it electronically and send it back. I wasn't his daughter in a crisis. I was a questionable borrower, a bad credit risk. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, the humiliation of physical weight in my chest. He was reminding me that even his love was conditional, transactional, and required a paper trail. The final exhibit was more recent, displayed on the bright, cold screen of my laptop. It was a family video call a few months ago. Margaret was showing off photos from her and my father's trip to Tuscany, while Nathan and his wife, Rebecca, chimed in from their minimalist, all-white living room in San Jose. They talked about a Patek Philippe watch Nathan had just bought himself. Then my mother, with that same feigned interest, turned the conversation to me. "And how is your little job at the museum, dear? Still doing all those little things you do?" She smiled sweetly. "Are you contributing to your 401k? I do worry about you, darling. You're not getting any younger, and you can't just spend everything you earn." The question wasn't born of genuine concern. It was a weapon, wrapped in the language of responsible adulthood. It was designed to highlight my perceived financial instability, to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, at the very bottom. It was the casual, constant erosion of my worth, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one a small scar, each one an exhibit in the museum of my life. My hands tightened on the steering wheel of my old Honda Civic, the worn plastic a familiar comfort. The car rattled as it hit a bump on the highway. In the passenger seat, a small black object lay like a stone. The USB drive Michael had slipped into my hand as I'd fled. It felt heavy, dense with the weight of the last 30 years. All the exhibits, all the quiet humiliations, all the whispered insults, they were just memories. But what was on this drive, that was evidence. The museum had been a private collection for too long. I glanced in the rearview mirror at my sleeping daughter, a silent promise forming in my heart. It was time to open the doors to the public. The decision to fight back, born in a moment of cold fury on the highway, felt righteous and powerful. But righteousness doesn't pay the rent. Back in Raleigh, the grand, abstract idea of justice collided with the brutal, concrete reality of my life. Before I could be a warrior, I had to be a survivor, and surviving as a single mother on an art museum salary was a war of attrition fought on 1,000 tiny fronts, a battle I waged in the quiet corners of my days. My primary battlefield was often the scarred wooden surface of my kitchen table, usually long after Isabel was asleep. On a Tuesday night, under the solitary glow of an old IKEA lamp, I would conduct my symphony of bills. The electric bill from Duke Energy sat next to the rent check for our small apartment, beside a copay invoice from Isabel's pediatrician. I'd open my banking app, the small glowing numbers on the screen holding my life in their balance. My paycheck from the museum would appear, a brief, shimmering moment of relief, before I started the grim chess game of allocating every single dollar. Rent first, always, then utilities, then groceries. I'd move the virtual money around, a delicate dance to ensure nothing bounced, to make sure the lights stayed on and there was food in the fridge. This wasn't the kind of poverty you see in movies. It was the quiet, relentless stress of the American working class. The constant gnawing fear that you are one unexpected expense, one blown tire, away from complete and utter crisis. The war continued under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Harris Teeter. Isabel sat quietly in the shopping cart, her trauma having stolen her usual bubbly chatter, her silence a constant, painful reminder of why I was doing this. I pushed the cart down the cereal aisle, and my hand automatically reached for the box of organic Honey Nut O's that she loved. Then my eyes caught the price tag, $7. I paused, my fingers tracing the cheerful cartoon bee on the box. A wave of sharp parental guilt washed over me. I put it back on the shelf and picked up the store-brand version for half the price, hoping she wouldn't notice. At the meat counter, I lingered for a moment over the thick, marbled ribeye steaks my father favored, the kind he'd grill on his $1,000 Weber. I imagined his dismissive face, then resolutely moved on, placing a value pack of chicken thighs into my cart. These were the invisible sacrifices, the small daily surrenders that no one saw. Each one was a quiet defiance, a testament to the fact that I was doing this on my own terms for her. It was a meager kingdom, but it was mine, and I would defend it fiercely. Some days the universe seemed to conspire against me, testing the limits of my resolve. On the way to drop Isabel at school one morning, a dreaded symbol illuminated the dashboard of my 2008 Honda Civic, the amber glow of the check engine light. My heart sank into my stomach. That light was a harbinger of financial doom, a small icon that could represent hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars I simply didn't have. I forced a smile for Isabel, who was staring out the window, lost in her own thoughts. It's nothing, sweetie, just a silly light. But inside, the mental calculator was already spinning at frantic speed. Okay, I can put the credit card bill on the minimum payment this month. I have that freelance writing gig for the local magazine. Maybe I can ask for another assignment. I can eat rice and beans for a week. This was the invisible armor I wore every day. The constant background hum of anxiety was a stark, bitter contrast to the memory of Nathan showing off his new Tesla, boasting about its ludicrous mode. My life felt like it was permanently in limp home mode, and my resilience wasn't about being fearless. It was about forcing myself to keep driving, even when my stomach was twisted in knots of pure dread. That night, the final straw came not as a bang, but as a quiet, digital whimper. I had spent hours the previous week working on a freelance article, pouring my leftover energy into it, hoping the extra few $100s would be my buffer for the inevitable car repair. An email landed in my inbox. The subject line was bland, regarding your submission. The message was polite, generic, and utterly crushing. Thank you for your submission. At this time, we have decided to go in a different direction. Rejection. It was a small thing, a normal part of freelance life, but tonight it felt monumental. It was the weight of the bills, the ghost of the steak I couldn't buy, the ominous glow of the dashboard light, all crashing down on me at once. The exhaustion was bone deep, a weariness not just of the body, but of the soul. I stared at the blank wall of my living room, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me, suffocating me. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the one contact that felt like a lifeline. I pressed it. Her phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice warm and familiar. "Chloe," I began, my voice cracking, the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally breaking and giving way to the flood. "Chloe, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm so tired." The sob that had escaped my lips over the phone was the sound of a dam breaking. I hung up and slid to the floor, my back against the cool kitchen cabinets, feeling utterly empty. I had nothing left. Less than 30 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Chloe. She stood there on my small porch, her expression a mixture of fierce loyalty and profound concern. In one hand, she held a cardboard tray with 2 large lattes from Cuppa Joe, our favorite downtown coffee shop. In the other, a pink and white box from Krispy Kreme. The sight of it, so simple and so thoughtful, made a fresh wave of tears well up in my eyes. I opened the door and she didn't say a word. She just set the coffee and donuts on the entryway table, stepped inside, and wrapped her arms around me. I buried my face in her shoulder and finally let go of the shuddering, silent sobs I had been holding back for days, for years. My tiny living room, cluttered with Isabel's toys and my own anxieties, suddenly felt like the safest place on earth. She didn't offer any empty platitudes like, "It's going to be okay," or "You're strong, you'll get through this." She just held me and said, her voice a firm anchor in my storm, "I'm here. Let it all out. You are not alone." In that moment, her quiet presence was a more powerful validation than anything my own family had ever given me. It was the simple, profound gift of being seen. When the tears finally subsided, we sat on my worn-out sofa, the lattes warming our hands. I told her everything. The whole ugly story spilled out, the slap, the chilling sound it made, Nathan's venomous whisper, my father's cold dismissal, my mother's cruel smile. I told her about the USB drive, which I'd tucked away in a jewelry box as if it were both a treasure and a bomb. Chloe listened, her gaze never wavering. As a therapist, she was a professional listener, but this was different. This was her friend. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her coffee and looked me straight in the eye. "Julia," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "what you experienced was not your brother being hot-tempered. That's a pattern of abusive behavior. The slap was the physical manifestation, but the emotional abuse, the constant belittling, the gaslighting, that's been happening for years." She leaned forward. "And your parents, Arthur and Margaret, are enablers. They've created and normalized a toxic system where Nathan is rewarded for his cruelty and you're punished for existing. The exhaustion you feel, it's a perfectly normal response to long-term trauma. You are not weak, Julia. You're a survivor." Hearing those words, abusive behavior, enablers, toxic system, survivor, was like someone turning on a light in a dark room I'd been stumbling around in my whole life. She gave my pain a name. She handed me a vocabulary for my wounds, and in doing so, she took away the shame my family had tried so hard to burden me with. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't oversensitive. I was a person reacting to a deeply unhealthy environment. Then Chloe's demeanor shifted from therapist to field general. She placed her coffee cup down and pulled a small notebook and a pen from her purse. "Okay," she said, her tone all business. "We are not going to let you drown in this. We are going to make a plan. Action brings clarity." She started writing as she spoke. Step 1. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you are calling Dr. Anya Sharma, the best child psychologist I know. We need to get Isabel professional support immediately. Step 2. You need to talk to a lawyer. Not to sue, necessarily, but to understand all your options and protect yourself. I have a friend from college, Emily Carter. She's brilliant, discreet, and she eats people like your father for breakfast. Step 3. She looked up, her expression softening. Tonight, you and Isabel are sleeping at my house. My guest room is ready. You need one night, just one, where you don't have to worry about anything but breathing. She tore the page from the notebook and handed it to me. It was a simple list, but it felt like a map out of hell. Chloe had taken my chaotic, overwhelming pain and transformed it into a series of manageable, concrete steps. She didn't just offer sympathy, She offered a strategy. She gave me my power back. The next morning, after a night of deep, uninterrupted sleep in the quiet of Chloe's guest room, I woke up feeling a fragile sense of resolve. I drank the coffee she'd made, watched Isabel quietly coloring at the kitchen table, and took the list. I found Emily Carter's number online. My hand trembled as I dialed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something new, something that felt like courage. "Hello," a professional voice answered. I took a deep breath. "Emily, my name is Julia Davidson. We went to school together at Chapel Hill. I have something extremely serious I need to consult you about." After my call with the lawyer, Emily, a fragile sense of order, had begun to settle over the chaos in my mind. She had given me clarity and a path forward. But my family, sensing a loss of their iron-fisted control, was not about to let me find peace. My phone, which had been silent for a day, suddenly became a battlefield. The first assault came from my mother. Her name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering, taking a deep breath as Chloe had advised. Her voice was a confection of honeyed sweetness and concern. "Julia, darling, I hear you've made it back to Raleigh. Are you all right? You must be upset with your brother. Now come on. You know Nathan adores Isabel. He was just under a lot of pressure from work. Why don't you come back to the lake house? We're family. Let's not make a big scene. People from your father's golf club are starting to ask questions." Not a single word of apology. Not one question about Isabel's well-being. Her only concern was appearances, the potential for gossip rippling through the manicured lawns of their exclusive community. The old Julia would have capitulated, would have apologized for causing trouble. But the new Julia, the one who had listened to Chloe, heard the manipulation for what it was. I kept my voice even, my words measured. "I need some time, Mom." Then I did something I had never done before in my 30 years. I pressed the red icon on my screen. I hung up on her. The simple act felt both terrifying and liberating. It was my first small act of rebellion. The second wave of the attack came not as a call, but as a cold, formal email from my father. The subject line read, "Regarding the family matter." It was phrased with the detached precision of a corporate lawyer. "Julia," it began, "your recent actions and subsequent silence are causing irreparable damage to the solidarity of this family. Your behavior is being misinterpreted, and it reflects poorly on all of us. I am informing you that all financial support, including the monthly assistance we provide, will be suspended immediately until you agree to resolve this issue privately and reasonably." It was a direct hit, aimed squarely at my most vulnerable point. The familiar knot of financial panic tightened in my stomach. The specter of the check engine light, the stack of bills on my kitchen table, he knew exactly where to apply pressure. The fear was real, a cold sweat on the back of my neck. But this time, something else rose with it, a hot, defiant anger. He wasn't offering help. He was leveraging my dependence. He was using money as a leash, and for the first time, I felt the desperate urge to chew right through it. The final offensive of the day was a full frontal assault from Nathan himself. His name appeared on my screen, and I let it go to voicemail, my hands shaking too much to answer. A moment later, a notification popped up. A voicemail transcription. The words on the screen were jagged and brutal, stripped of all pretense. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Julia? Are you trying to blackmail me with your kid? Let me tell you something, you won't get a damn cent. You will regret crossing me. I will make your life in Raleigh harder than you can possibly imagine." I read the words over and over. The old fear was there, a ghost whispering in my ear. But his raw, undisguised aggression had an unintended effect. It didn't break me, it forged me, it solidified my resolve. I saw him clearly now, not as my golden boy brother, but as a bully who had just threatened a single mother and her child. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was a war. My silence had driven them to reveal their true selves. A manipulator, a financier, and a thug. They weren't fighting to heal the family. They were fighting to maintain their power. I sat there in the quiet of Chloe's apartment, my phone feeling toxic in my hand. I watched as another message lit up the screen. This one was from my father. It was short, a final brutal turn of the screw. We are withdrawing Isabel's application and our recommendation from the Oak Haven Day School if we do not hear from you by tomorrow. That was it. That was the line. They had slapped my child. They had insulted me. They had threatened my financial stability. And now they were threatening her future, holding her education hostage to demand my silence and submission. A cold, crystalline rage settled over me, so pure and so absolute that it burned away every last shred of fear, every lingering hope for reconciliation. They had taken everything from me, and in doing so, they had left me with nothing left to lose. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs feeling different, sharper. I walked over to my laptop, opened it, and the screen bathed my face in a pale, determined light. I started a new email, my fingers moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The blinking cursor on the blank page no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a starting gun. The text message from my father, the one threatening Isabel's future at the Oak Haven Day School, was not just the final straw. It was an act of emotional arson. It burned away the last vestiges of hope I had clung to, the foolish, deeply ingrained belief that somewhere, beneath the layers of disappointment and cruelty, there was a family who loved me. I walked into Isabel's room that night, the soft glow of her dinosaur nightlight casting long shadows on the walls. I stood over her small bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Her cheek, where Nathan's hand had struck, still had a faint, ghostly bruise, visible only if you knew where to look. I knew where to look. They had hurt her, and now, to protect the man who had hurt her, they were willing to sabotage her future, to slam a door on an opportunity she deserved. All to maintain their perfect false narrative. All to protect the golden boy. A rage, colder and clearer than anything I had ever felt, settled deep in my bones. It wasn't the hot, chaotic anger of a victim. It was the focused, glacial fury of a mother. In that moment, I realized they had finally given me a strange and terrible gift. They had taken everything from me, and in doing so, they had left me with absolutely nothing left to lose. The hope for a loving family was dead. In its place, a singular, sharp-edged purpose took root. They would be held accountable. Not for my pain, but for hers. And I wouldn't make them pay with money. I would make them pay with the one currency they valued above all else, their reputation. The next day, I met Emily Carter at a quiet corner table in a Starbucks, far from my usual neighborhood haunts. She had a sharp, intelligent face and a no-nonsense aura that immediately put me at ease. I laid it all out for her, the slap, the years of emotional abuse, the threats. I slid the small USB drive across the table. "It's all on here," I said, my voice steady. The slap, my father's and mother's reactions. She listened intently, her expression growing more severe with every word. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered analysis. When I finished, she tapped a pen against her legal pad. "Julia, A civil suit for assault would be a nightmare. They'd drag it out for years. They'd use their money to bury you in legal fees. And worst of all, they would force Isabel to testify. We are not putting a 6-year-old through that. That is the last thing we want. I felt a pang of disappointment, but she held up a hand. But, she said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with strategic fire, that doesn't mean we have no options. It means we fight smarter. What is Nathan's greatest weapon, his greatest asset? His reputation, I answered without hesitation. Exactly, Emily confirmed. He's a tech executive, a public figure in his world. He sits on charity boards. He mentors young entrepreneurs. His entire public persona is built on a foundation of integrity and leadership. She smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. So we won't attack him with a lawsuit. We'll attack his foundation. We will use the very corporate and social codes of conduct he pretends to uphold to bring him down. We will let his world judge him. That night, back in the sanctuary of Chloe's guest room, I felt a new sense of power humming in my veins. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The audio file popped up on the screen. I put on my headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. I listened not as a wounded daughter, but as an analyst, a prosecutor. I listened for clarity, for impact. There it was, Isabel's happy, carefree singing. Then Nathan's irritated voice, crack, the sound of the slap, sharp and undeniable. Isabel's choked sob, my father's cold, detached voice. You do need to learn a little shame. My mother's lilting, cruel laugh. And finally Nathan's hiss, garbage, just like her mother. I opened Audacity, a free audio editing program I'd used for my museum work. My hands were steady. I clipped the beginning and the end, trimming away the excess, the dead air. I isolated the core of the incident, distilling years of poison into a single, undeniable, 45-second dose of truth. The final product was brutal in its clarity. There was no context they could spin, no explanation they could offer. It was the unvarnished sound of their cruelty. I stared at the jagged blue sound waves on the screen, a visual representation of my daughter's pain. Perhaps you understand this feeling, that moment when all the years of swallowing your pain, of making excuses for them, of hoping they would change, finally curdles into something else. It's not just anger anymore. It's a clarity that is so cold and so absolute, it feels like a revelation. The final limit has been crossed, and you know with a certainty that quiets every other voice in your head that you will not be silent anymore. That night, I wasn't just doing this for Isabel. I was doing it for the 17-year-old girl whose dreams were dismissed over a steak dinner. For the 25-year-old new mother who was blamed for her own heartbreak. And maybe, in a way, I was doing it for you, too. For all of us who have been told to be quiet for far too long. With that silent vow solidifying in my heart, my fingers moved to the keyboard. I saved the audio file, naming it with cold precision, evidence.mp3. Then I opened a new blank document. At the top of the page, I typed the title, the words feeling like the first blows of a hammer against a wall that had stood for far too long. Statement of facts regarding the conduct of Nathan Davidson. The hours that followed my meeting with Emily were a blur of focused, almost feverish activity. The artist in me, the one who lived in shades of gray and emotional nuance, receded. In her place stood a cool, methodical strategist, a woman I barely recognized. My grief and anger were not gone. They were simply repurposed, channeled from a destructive, chaotic flood into a focused, high-pressure jet of water capable of cutting through steel. My small corner of Chloe's quiet living room became a war room, the glow of my laptop screen my only light. My first and most critical task was to finish the statement of facts. I wrote not with the flowery, wounded language of a victim, but with the cold, hard precision of a police report. Every word was chosen for its objectivity. I detailed the date, the time, and the exact location on the deck of the lake house. I transcribed the damning quotes from Nathan, Arthur, and Margaret verbatim, letting their own words serve as their indictment. On Emily's advice, I included a brief, objective background paragraph, a single paragraph describing the long-standing family dynamic, the documented pattern of favoritism, and my history of being marginalized, all stated as observable facts rather than emotional complaints. I sent the draft to Emily, who reviewed it overnight, her tracked changes appearing like a surgeon's precise incisions, trimming away anything that could be construed as opinion and leaving only the solid bone of truth. The final document was a weapon honed to a razor's edge. It was undeniable. Next came the research, the meticulous gathering of intelligence. With Chloe beside me, a silent, steady presence, providing moral support and an endless supply of coffee, I dove into the pristine, curated public world of Nathan Davidson. We spent hours online, our laptops humming in the quiet room, the rhythmic clicking of keys the only sound. We used LinkedIn and corporate websites to compile a complete list with photos and titles of the board of directors for Pinnacle Tech Investments, Nathan's private equity firm. We found the leadership roster for the Bright Futures Alliance, the prominent children's charity where he served on the board, his face smiling out from their Our Team page, a portrait of civic virtue. We identified the organizers of the Innovators Forum, a prestigious mentorship program where he was a featured mentor, his biography extolling his commitment to fostering new talent. For each organization, we downloaded their official code of conduct. The language was always the same, a glorious tapestry of corporate buzzwords: integrity, respect, ethical behavior, creating a safe and inclusive environment. Nathan's world was built upon these glossy, aspirational statements. I read them over and over, a bitter, ironic smile playing on my lips. He had handed me the very standards by which I would condemn him. I was going to hold a mirror up to his carefully constructed life, and his own world would be forced to see the monster hiding behind the philanthropic mask. As I was drafting the emails late into the night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number from a Charleston area code. My first instinct was to ignore it, my stomach clenching with the assumption that it was another salvo from my family. But something made me answer. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "Julia, it's Michael." It was my uncle, the one who had been filming. His voice was a hushed, hurried whisper, as if he were hiding in a pantry. "Listen, I don't have much time. I can't get involved publicly. Sarah would kill me. But I want you to know I'm on your side." What I saw, it was wrong, utterly wrong. He paused, and I could hear his nervous breath. "I've backed up the original, unedited video file to a secure cloud server. The whole thing from Isabel singing to the moment you got in your car. If you need a witness, if it comes to that, just call me. You have the proof." The call ended as quickly as it began, but its impact was immense. A crack of light had appeared in the solid wall of my family's betrayal. I wasn't entirely alone in there. Someone else knew the unvarnished truth. And he had just handed me an insurance policy. The knowledge fortified me, banishing the last lingering whispers of doubt that had been gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I had the audio, he had the video. The truth was secure. With a surge of renewed determination, I finalized the preparations. I created 3 separate, meticulously crafted emails, each one addressed to the key figures of the 3 organizations. I personalized each one slightly, quoting a specific line from their own code of conduct in the opening paragraph. The subject line was the same for all 3, designed for maximum impact. Formal complaint and evidence regarding the conduct of Nathan Davidson. I attached the 2 files to each email, the 45-second audio clip, evidence.mp3, and the surgically precise Statement of Facts PDF. Everything was ready. The ammunition was loaded. The targets were in my sights. I moved the cursor over the send button on the first email. It hovered there, a small, trembling arrow suspended between 2 worlds, the life I had always known and a future I couldn't yet imagine. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent room. This was the point of no return. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my mind echoing with the memory of Isabel's cry, my father's coldness, and my mother's laughter. Now or never. I sat in the darkness of Chloe's living room, the only light coming from the pale blue glow of my laptop screen. 3 emails sat open in my draft folder, 3 digital missiles aimed at the heart of my brother's world. I read the names on the distribution lists again: CEOs, chairman of the board, philanthropists, powerful people, Nathan's people. For a fleeting second, a cold wave of fear washed over me. The old Julia, the one who was conditioned to be quiet and accommodating, screamed inside my head. Think about what you're doing, the consequences, the threats, the final irreparable severing of family ties. I thought about the easier path, to close the laptop, delete the drafts, and crawl back into the familiar misery of acceptance. Then my gaze drifted to a small framed photo on the end table. It was a picture of Isabel, taken last spring at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Her face beaming with unrestrained joy as she stood in front of a vibrant, abstract painting. That smile, the pure, unfiltered happiness that my family had tried to extinguish. The fear vanished, replaced by a certainty as hard and clear as diamond. This was never about revenge. It was about protection. It was about ensuring that no one ever again would make her feel shame for being bright and loud and full of life. It was the one lesson I had to teach her, the one legacy I could give her, that her voice mattered and no one had the right to silence it. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs feeling final, decisive. My hand, which had been trembling moments before, was now perfectly steady. I moved the cursor over the first email, the one addressed to the board of directors at Pinnacle Tech Investments. Click. The screen confirmed it. Your message has been sent. 1 down. I moved to the second email, addressed to the leadership of the Bright Futures Alliance. My finger pressed down again. Click. Your message has been sent. 2 down. The final email was for the organizers of the Innovators Forum. My breath caught in my throat for just a moment. Then I exhaled, and with the breath went the last 30 years of fear and submission. Click. Your message has been sent. Done. It took less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds to detonate a bomb I had spent a lifetime building. 3 seconds to dismantle an empire built on a foundation of lies. The soft whoosh sound from my laptop speakers as the last email flew out into the digital ether echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, at the empty draft folder. I slowly, deliberately closed the laptop. The click of the lid was a sound of finality. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely light and walked to the small balcony overlooking the quiet Raleigh street. The night air was humid and cool, smelling of damp earth and distant rain. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of vindictive glee, but I felt none of that. Instead, there was just a vast, profound emptiness. A quiet so deep it was almost deafening. The storm had been unleashed. The weight I had carried for so long, the crushing burden of their disapproval and my own silence, was gone. It had been transferred from my shoulders onto theirs. Now all I could do was wait. I stood there for a long time, watching the headlights of passing cars slice through the darkness, each one a separate story going somewhere I couldn't imagine. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt like I could truly breathe, all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. The next morning, my phone remained eerily silent. No furious calls from my mother, no threatening texts from my brother, no cold, legalistic emails from my father. The silence was more unnerving than the storm had been. It was the calm before the tsunami. I was making Isabel breakfast, the simple act of scrambling eggs, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Not a call, an email. The sender's name made my heart stop. Charles Harrington, chairman of the board, Pinnacle Tech Investments. The subject line was 6 simple words that changed everything. Regarding your complaint about Nathan Davidson. My hand was shaking as I opened the email from Charles Harrington. The language was concise, corporate, and utterly devastating for my brother. It stated that, in light of the disturbing evidence I had provided, Mr. Nathan Davidson had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full internal investigation into his conduct. It assured me that Pinnacle Tech Investments took its code of ethics with the utmost seriousness. It was the first domino to fall. I didn't have to wait long for the others. The world Nathan had so carefully constructed, a world built on power and public perception, began to crumble with breathtaking speed. A few hours later, a friend sent me a link to a press release from the Bright Futures Alliance. It was a sterile, carefully worded statement announcing that they had accepted the resignation of Mr. Davidson from the board, effective immediately. He hadn't resigned, he had been pushed out. By that evening, his smiling face and glowing biography had been quietly scrubbed from the Innovators Forum website, as if he had never existed. The news, I later learned, ripped through the tech and finance communities on the West Coast like wildfire. Whispers started on private message boards, then escalated to veiled posts on LinkedIn. The empire Nathan had spent his entire life building, the very foundation of his identity, was cracking apart in less than 24 hours. Not because of a messy public lawsuit, but because of a 45-second audio file. I felt a grim, chilling sense of satisfaction. It was the cold, clean logic of consequence, something my family had never understood. Late that afternoon, I received a call from a California number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but a gut feeling made me answer. "Hello, is this Julia?" The voice was trembling but firm. It was Rebecca, Nathan's wife. "Yes," I said, my heart starting to pound. I got a copy of the audio," she said, her voice cracking. "Someone on one of the boards sent it to me. Julia, I believe you." A sob escaped her. "This isn't the first time he's lost control. It's never been physical with me or the kids, but the things he says, the way he controls everything, the rage, I've been making excuses for him for years." She took a shaky breath. "I've had enough. I can't live like this anymore. The boys and I are going to my parents' house. I've already called a lawyer." The call was a painful, powerful validation. My small act of self-preservation had inadvertently become a lifeline for someone else, cracking open the gilded cage she had been trapped in. I hadn't just exposed a single act of violence, I had exposed the rotten core of the man himself. The final act of the drama unfolded not in California, but in the heart of the Old South, in Charleston, South Carolina. My grandmother, Mary Davidson, the matriarch of the family, a woman whose quiet disapproval could wither my father's blustering confidence in an instant, had summoned an emergency family meeting at her historic home. I declined the invitation, telling my Uncle Michael that my presence wasn't necessary. The evidence could speak for itself. Michael called me later that night to tell me what had happened. He had stood in my grandmother's formal living room, surrounded by ancestral portraits and suffocating tradition, and played the audio file from his phone. He described the silence that followed as absolute and terrifying. My grandmother, a tiny woman with a will of iron, had listened with her eyes closed. When it was over, she opened them and fixed her gaze first on my father, then on my brother. "You two," she had said, her voice low but carrying the weight of final judgment, "have disgraced the Davidson name. Arthur, you enabled this arrogance. You raised a son who believes he is above consequence because you always protected him from it. And you, Nathan," she had turned to him, her voice cutting like glass, "you are a bully and a coward. You have brought shame upon us all. You will enroll in anger management therapy by the end of the month, or you will no longer be my grandson. That is not a request." For the first time in my life, someone in a position of power within my family had wielded it for justice, not for control. A line had been drawn. A verdict had been rendered. After I hung up with Michael, I sat in the dark for a long time. The war was over. I had won. Nathan's career was in ruins. His marriage was over. My parents had been publicly rebuked. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I just felt empty. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. I had set out to burn down a corrupt system, and I had succeeded, but the rubble was still my family. The ashes were still my childhood. I had won, but I had also lost. I had lost the fantasy I had secretly carried my whole life. The fantasy that one day they might change, that one day they might see me. Now I knew with absolute certainty that they never would. The victory felt necessary, but it also felt like a funeral. I stared out the window into the Raleigh night, watching the distant city lights. So I thought to myself, after everything is torn down, what is left to build? The question that had haunted me in the empty aftermath of the battle, after everything is torn down, what is left to build, was not answered overnight. It was answered slowly, quietly, in the small, unremarkable moments of the months that followed. It was answered not with a grand declaration, but with the steady, patient work of healing. 6 months later, I sat on a hard plastic chair in the warm, stuffy auditorium of Isabel's elementary school. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn and proud parents. On the brightly lit stage, the second-grade choir stood in 2 neat rows, a sea of fidgeting children in their Sunday best. And there, in the middle of the back row, was Isabel. She wore a simple white dress, her hair pulled back with a blue ribbon. She looked so small, so achingly precious under the bright lights. When the music teacher gave the downbeat, a chorus of sweet, slightly off-key voices filled the room, and among them, clear and strong, was Isabel's. She wasn't just mouthing the words. Her head was held high, her face was radiant. and she was singing with a joy that felt like a physical force, a pure, brilliant light, pushing back against all the darkness we had endured. She had found her voice again. Watching her, a wave of profound emotion washed over me, and tears streamed down my face. They weren't tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of gratitude. This was the real victory. This was the reason for the fight. Every painful memory, every sleepless night, every difficult choice, it was all worth it for this one perfect, beautiful song. My relationship with my parents became a delicate, complicated thing. At my grandmother's insistence, they began attending family counseling. My father, I heard, was resistant, my mother more concerned with how the therapist perceived her than with any actual self-reflection. They offered stilted, awkward apologies over the phone, apologies that sounded more like legal disclaimers than expressions of remorse. I accepted them, not because I believed in their sincerity, but because I knew forgiveness was a gift I needed to give myself. But acceptance was not amnesty. I built boundaries, not of anger, but of self-preservation. I no longer accepted their financial assistance. A promotion at the museum and a steady stream of freelance work had given me the priceless gift of independence. We spoke on holidays and birthdays. The calls were polite, surface level. I told them about Isabel's school play, about my work. I listened to their talk of golf scores and stock portfolios, but I no longer sought their approval. I no longer yearned for their validation. The desperate need for their acceptance, a weight I had carried my entire life, had finally been set down. The distance between us was not a punishment. It was my peace. The answer to what I would build became clear one Friday evening. The final scene of my story doesn't take place in a courtroom or a grand family home. It takes place in my new apartment, a bright, airy two-bedroom in a part of Raleigh I had always wanted to live in. It was a space filled with Isabel's artwork, with second-hand furniture I had lovingly restored, with light and with laughter. I hosted a small party, not for any special occasion, but just to celebrate life itself. Chloe was there, her laughter echoing in the kitchen. Emily, my brilliant lawyer, was deep in conversation with my Uncle Michael and his wife, Sarah, who had driven down from the lake. A few other close friends from my book club and the museum mingled, their presence a warm, comforting blanket. We ate pizza from paper plates and drank cheap wine and craft beer. It was simple, and it was perfect. At one point, Isabel, feeling brave, stood in the center of the living room and announced she had a song to sing. A hush fell over the room. She sang, "You Are My Sunshine," her voice small but confident, and when she finished, the room erupted in applause. The love that surrounded her in that moment was so real, so unconditional. It was almost tangible. Looking at their faces, at these people who had shown up for me, who had listened, who had believed me, who had offered help without condition, I finally understood. Family isn't always the one you are born into. Sometimes family is the one you build. It's the people who help you find your own voice, and then, when you're ready, ask you to sing. And if you are listening to this, and you have ever felt your own voice silenced, if you've ever been made to feel that your pain was an inconvenience, or that you were too sensitive for simply having feelings at all, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Your hurt is valid. Your resilience is a quiet superpower. And your voice, even if it's just a whisper right now, deserves to be heard. The journey to reclaim it can be long and it can be lonely. But the sunrise you build for yourself at the end of that road, it is worth every single step. Looking at those loving faces, I realized that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, family is the one you build, the people who help you find your own voice, and then, when you're ready, ask you to sing. And if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt your own voice being silenced, if you've ever been called too sensitive when you were just hurting, I need you to know this. You are not alone. Your pain is valid. Your resilience is a quiet superpower. And your voice, even if it's just a whisper right now, deserves to be heard. The journey to reclaim it can be long, but the sunrise you build for yourself at the end of that road, it is worth every single step.